Working Cows Podcast, episode 196.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, here with another episode for you, powered by the Global Ag Network. Very excited to be joined again today by Steve Campbell. Last time Steve was on, we had a great conversation about selecting the right cow. And today, Steve reached out to me and wanted to talk a little bit about how do we remineralize cattle using salt and what that can do for us in a drier than normal year. I just saw a map today, over 1,000 counties in the West and some farther east as well have been released for CRP hay and grazing. So, very, very severe drought conditions being released this early in the summer, talking here at the end of June. So really unique situation that we're facing, and if we can use some natural, more affordable remedies for getting more out of that, what little grass we do grow and the poorer quality forage that we're going to have access to, it's a good thing. So really excited to talk to Steve about that today. Steve, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, Clay, thank you very much for having me again. I certainly enjoyed the last time, and I hope that we can help a few people today with what I see are things coming up from a long, hot, dry summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's impacting much of the West and maybe some other places too. But for sure, we're hearing a lot about it in the West, hearing about fires in Montana, and it's fairly early. We're sitting here in the middle of June recording this episode. So yeah. It's pretty early for that, but I guess kind of where I would like to start is what's kind of the high level overview of the cow's nutritional state or nutritional requirements or some of those things, and how is the drier climate or drier than average year or exceptionally dry year in some cases impacting how that cow is processing all of the different things that are coming at her from a parasite perspective or a fly perspective. How is she being impacted negatively by a drier climate, drier year?
A drier year is going to make basically everything we offer the cow less nourishing to the cow. So stepping back, thinking about the 20,000 foot view, if we've been rotationally grazing, if we've been cover cropping, remineralizing, laying biology in the soil, those sorts of things, and we've got 12, 15 bricks grass, our cattle are going to do pretty well most of the year. We don't have too many issues. If we haven't gone down that path, if we're kind of always on the edge, we've only got 1, 2, 4 bricks grass and bricks. I'm sure that most of your listeners understand what refractometer. You plant sap, and you can see the mineral content of the grass by using that. Well, if our cows are in an alkaline state from the high mineral grass, they tend to repel disease and internal external parasites. If they're in a acid state from very low mineral, high toxin, high stress situation, they tend to attract flies, lice, worms, pink eye, foot rot, scours. So we have to figure out where we are on a normal year, and then know that we're probably going to have to supplement a little more this year than we do in a normal year because our grass is going to be lignified or the minerals tied up longer on a year like this. And then just there is not as much forage for them to consume.
Sure. So that idea of lignified forage, I think the way I've heard it explained is that cell wall thickens, and it's a lot harder for them to extract the nutrients out of that blade of grass than it was, a few weeks or months ago when it was actively growing and continuing to produce. Is that a accurate understanding as far as you understand it?
As far as I understand it, it is, and you've got an average for your herd. But some cattle have bigger rumens. Some cattle produce more butter fat. Some cattle have a better gland system, hormonal system, and they can eat and digest more out of every bite, regardless of what the conditions are, than other animals who don't have a large gut, who shed late in the year. And while I'm right there, if your cattle haven't shed when you put the bulls in and you're figuring out which ones you're going to sell this year, those are probably the ones that should get a check mark because they're going to have a harder time getting pregnant, everything else being equal.
Huh. Yeah, and I think if I'm right, while we're there, if I'm right, that was Bondsma's one thing. Is that right? The early shedding animal?
Yeah, early shedding, his one thing, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so I have one animal in particular who came out of a certain set of genetics that I've heard you mention in public that I won't mention here. But she is just now starting to shed. But as I said, we're in mid-June. Would you call that? Other animals have shed earlier than her, but would you call that late shedding? Or since I'm not turning the bulls in until August, is that okay?
Well, everything else being equal, that's late shedding. However, how long ago did she come to your place? Every time you move cattle, there is a cost for them to get adapted to your environment.
Sure. Yeah, she's been there just over a year, I suppose. But the family, the genetic family that she comes from, is just kind of that high producing, big frame silage pile out back kind of a critter. But her mother was a gift to my family, so I didn't look the gift horse in the mouth too deeply.
I understand. Fred Provenza, in his book Nourishment, does an excellent job of talking that whole. It's a rather large field of work that he did, but that's a very interesting story about what mom ate and now what Junior needs to get along.
Sure. Very good. So back to this discussion of, how do we start to think differently about managing in a drier year? You mentioned two things, an alkaline state and an acid state. The alkaline state is good. It's helping them to repel the outside parasites, if you will, pests, and the acid state is bad. It's attracting them. That's a fairly simple understanding of it, but do I have it correct so far?
That's correct. And this is something where reading Maynard Murray, Kerry Reams, Weston A. Price, Francis Pottinger, and then observing cattle, this acid alkaline. Let's see, Reams' biological theory of ionization, if anyone wants to get really deep into it, is a rather interesting field of study. But a mammal that is alkaline tends to resist disease better than a mammal that is acid. And these lignified grasses that we're going to have for a longer period of this time this year, it's harder for every animal you own to get those minerals out. So getting more minerals in, and I'm going to go ahead and say it out loud, nothing from China going into your mineral program will help you tremendously. With fewer minerals going in, any toxins we have get exaggerated, and their effects on our cows are greater. For the listeners, a slow hump, I guess if I want to call it that, from the shoulder blades back to the hook bones in the back of a cow. If you see that raised up 2 or 3 inches, that is a classic cadmium toxicity loop. And one of the first things cadmium does is it screws up an animal's ability to regulate internal body temperature. Well, if we don't have shade and we don't have minerals and we've got cadmium present, when the bull shows up, that cow's too hot. Or if the bull has that hump, he's too hot. But if 3% of your animals have this hump, they're your miner's canary saying, hey, either through my mineral or through my feed, fertilizer, I've got cadmium going into the cow herd. Calcium and conditioner are your 2 best tools, either to prevent or sometimes to get that back out of the cow.
So I know that the question to many, or the answer to many questions that I ask on the Working Cows podcast is it depends. But are there times of the year when we can reasonably expect the mineral requirements of a cow to be met from the forage that she is on, or should we always have ample supply of the mineral out in front of them?
There are times when it's easier to digest the minerals that are in there out. Green in the spring now, not when it's real washy. After that first 2 or 3 weeks when it kind of hardens it slightly, then it's more nourishing than when it's just they're chasing green all the time. And then it gets hot and lignified. Then in the fall, when it cools off, we get a little rain. It's easier to get the minerals out of that feed. In most cases, the mineral content of our soil is, well, the mineral availability of our soil is too low.
Sure.
And it's not in the plant. In the mineral box, on average, those minerals dry are about 20% bioavailable in attached to a carbon atom through your plants. They're 90% bioavailable. So whatever we're feeding the cow, the part she doesn't need that goes out the back end, it just results in higher mineral content grass next year. So we didn't lose anything. It's so hard to find clean mineral mixes. I have just gone to only recommending the ancient sequestered sources of sea salt. The Redmond, the Kansas, the C90, I guess that's not an ancient sequestered source, but it's the one Maynard Murray started out with there in Mexico, Baja.
Where do you go? You mentioned a couple of, I think Kansas is a brand name, right? And then Redmond is a brand name, C90, I think also. So those are some sources. But is that alone enough? Do we need to go and find something else, or how do we get enough of that in them to meet their mineral requirements? Let's talk about some of those things.
Well, it's an excellent question. The Kansas is actually Independent Salt Company in right. Kannapolis, Kansas. If a cow, average time of average elevation, average rainfall, it depends. If you could feed her 5 ounces of sea salt a day, well, she is not going to consume that. You're going to have to entice that. There was a fellow in Nebraska that I talked to a year ago, 1st of August. And he had started on this sea salt deal with Enticer 10 months earlier. And he said that he was getting his cows to consume about 7 ounces of sea salt per cow per day, with 1.3 ounces of soybean meal per cow per day.
Huh.
There's 800 ounces in a 50-pound bag of soybean meal. So, I mean, that's like 600 doses of sea salt that one bag would do. And I told the gentleman when I was there in August, I said, well, I don't know that you need to feed that. You probably drop back to the 5 ounces. And I mean, he just looked like the umpire at home base. He took his hands and going right, left. He goes, I don't want to change a thing. You know, it was kind of like safe. He said, last year I'd go out and all I had to do was, I knew I was going to have to doctor an animal. And he said, it's so nice to just go out and enjoy my animals. Well, on an average year, I would say most places need about 5 ounces. But I think this year, you're going to probably need about 7 ounces of that sea salt a day. And so it's going to take some Enticer. And what does it need on your ranch, Clay, versus my ranch versus somebody else's? That's what you're just going to have to figure out, and then vary the amount of Enticer to get 5, 6, 7 ounces of sea salt per cow per day. They're only going to take out of that what they need, and the rest is all going to go out on your pasture next year when it rains, or later this year when it rains. You'll just have more nutritious grass in the future.
You can spend a lot on cattle mineral, and generally the consumption is not that high. What does it cost to get 7 ounces into a cow when you're taking this approach?
It depends. Where do you live and how close are you to any of those sources? The Kansas, I should say Independent and Redmond are both about 93% sodium chloride and 7% minerals. I believe the C90 is on the order of 20% minerals and 80% sodium chloride. So if we're after the minerals, you kind of got to take that cost into account. So the fellow there he was outside of Valentine, Nebraska. He was using the Kansas stuff, and I think it was probably costing him $3.50 a bag for that Kansas salt delivered to his place. So one bag would do about 110 cows for a day. 7 ounces a day. So that person can kind of do the math. And, this is the leap of faith part of this whole thing, but next year's calf, if you can get a clean, mineral-rich inter-uterine environment, next year's calf, you're finally going to start seeing the genetics you already own. Now, that's a bit much on a dry year like this. That is, I probably shouldn't even have brought that up. But Clay, you said something a minute ago. I like something natural. It works, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. There are more expensive ways to do all this stuff, and probably more slam dunk. But I'm always looking for the thing that leaves the most money in the rancher's pocket, whether that's lower cost this year or more income next year by spending the same amount.
Right. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, I realized that every time that the feed salesman left, he drove away with 2 of my black bulls on the back of his pickup, and I thought maybe I should just see what happens if I don't let him drive away with 2 of those little black bulls, and see how we get along. So, I think that there's always a different way of looking at it, and always a different way of thinking about it, and if we can maximize the return to the producer, that's a good thing. So you talked about Enticer. Is there anything else that you would recommend having in that mix, or is it just salt and some kind of an Enticer? And then I got another question that I'll write down, and we'll get there,
Okay.
so I don't ask you two questions at once.
Well, the four things that I have seen people use as an enticer are cane sugar, dry molasses, ground corn, and soybean meal. And it's just whatever is the cheapest, and doesn't break some rule that you need to follow because of a protocol that you're trying to produce your cattle under. The one was quite inexpensive at 1.3 ounces of soybean meal a day. But thinking about that, 20% bioavailable on average. This is a rabbit hole. Richard Olry wrote a book called Minerals for the Genetic Code. And Richard said that on a cow's best day, 70 degrees, grass is green, slight breeze, maybe a little bit overcast, describe a good day for a cow. On her best day, she can convert 16% of the sodium selenite, which is the selenium that most people supplement with, into selenomethionine, which is the form it has to be used in the body. People say, well, I can't afford the selenium yeast. Well, if you're feeding, and I'm just using 100 to make the math easy for me, if you're feeding 100 sodium selenite, the cow gets 16. She had to do a little work, and we had to be worried about whether 100 was too much to be toxic. Selenium yeast, it's already the selenomethionine, it is 90% bioavailable. So if you feed her 20, she gets 18, didn't have to do any work, and if she got too much, she just excretes it. So there's a safety factor there. It's no more expensive. However, if the navel cords break off longer than 2 inches, in general, your cow herd is sufficient in selenium. And if it's shorter than that, you need more selenium in your cow herd. But 5, 6, 7 ounces of sea salt a day should get you plenty of selenium. They're gonna excrete everything they don't need.
So is there any of those? I mean, you mentioned, if you're in a grass-fed program, maybe not the ground corn or the soybean meal. Is there any of those that are better in your opinion than another, or do any of them contribute to an acid state or an alkaline state, or they're all neutral that way, and you can use them as an enticer, however you see necessary in your herd?
Okay, so they're not monogastric, they're ruminant animals. So they handle sugar different than we do. Sugar would definitely turn us acid, but it doesn't so much a cow. However, I want to step back a little bit. The most alkaline would be the baking soda, and the only one I recommend is natural soda out of Rifle, Colorado. Then the next is the Redmond conditioner. It's a part of the zeolite family. It's a montmorillonite bentonite, sodium bentonite clay. And then apple cider vinegar, even though it's an acid, it's alkaline forming in the body. And then the slowest of the four is the sea salt. Plain white table salt for us is acid forming. Sea salts that's got some color to it is alkaline forming. And could you ask your question again, because I forgot what you just.
It's all right. I was asking more about the enticers. All those enticers you listed are not going to contribute to the issue, right? I mean, so they're going to continue moving us in the right direction as far as alkaline or acid is concerned.
Yeah, so the soybean meal is going to have the fat in there, which you're not going to have so much in the cracked corn. Probably more energy in the cracked corn, I guess. Energy is what gets cows pregnant. Clay, I don't know on your website if there's any way, if I sent you a chart out of the book Factors Affecting Calf Crop, there is a chart in there that just is amazing about how important energy is for pregnancy, not protein. And in some instances, you add protein and fewer cows get pregnant. So I guess a person needs to think about that as to which one works. But sometimes it's a matter of, hey, we just need to get them alkaline and whatever is available. Time for a story, I guess.
Perfect.
Last year, about the 1st of August, end of July, I was in Northwest South Dakota. And I got to this rancher's place about 30 minutes before he did, and his son and I unloaded some stuff. And he and I were talking, and I see him looking over my shoulder, and I asked him what he was looking at. And he said, well, I think those cows are in the wrong pasture. So we got in the side-by-side and went out there, I don't know, a mile and a half, and they were. But I have these cows, 250 pair, and they were just screaming. You had thought we had come the morning after weaning, and we were standing on, calves on one side of a gate and cows on the other, and we're trying to have this conversation right here. It wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen. And so what we did is we took 2 parts conditioner, 2 parts baking soda, 1 part dry molasses, and 250 cows. We had 2 12-foot long feeders that we spaced about 50 feet apart. We mixed that in each of these. And over the course of the next 2 days, those cows consumed 7 ounces of baking soda per cow per day and 7 ounces of conditioner per cow per day. And in 36 hours from the time we put that out there, then the flies left. We got them alkaline so fast, they were no longer a good house for bugs. Now, the neighbors' yearlings weren't very happy running with their tails in the air, but those cows got alkaline and the flies stayed away. He was fixing to have a pink eye disaster. He went out and checked these cows that morning and everything was fine. They hit that day, and he said, I've never seen him hit this hard, and I never had either. And he said, and I've certainly never seen him leave that fast.
Sure. So I don't know the last time a week went by in one of the, grazing Facebook groups where somebody in one of those groups didn't ask a question about cafeteria style minerals, and your story kind of brings that to mind about, we separate out all the minerals, we get them in a cafeteria style box, and we let the cow select what she needs, which is, makes sense to me. Is that another valid approach, or is this a valid replacement for that with these 4 things available to the cow in the paddock, and she can meet her needs with these things the same as she would in a cafeteria style system?
In theory, the cafeteria style system should work just like they say. That the biggest thing is nothing from China, no individual ingredient from China. Almost every ingredient from China has cadmium and probably other things. And you'll know if you've got that hump in the cow's back. It screws up the cow's ability to regulate internal body temperature. It lowers your pregnancy rate, and you get a slowly diminishing weaning weight if you've got a cadmium problem in your herd. So now back to your question. If there's nothing from China, that should work. However, 3.25 years ago, 4.25 years ago, I was down in Texas and got asked to come and help some people that were struggling, and they were using one of these cafeteria style deals, spending $1,000 to $1,100 a month on 118 cows. This is not sustainable. And something we haven't talked about yet, but we did the dry salt, and then we made a second stock tank with mineral water. I'll describe that here in a minute, and the conditioner. And this fellow there said that for the first 6 months, at an absolute minimum, 70, but probably 80% of all the water they drank was the mineral water. Well, within 45 days, he just quit putting out the cafeteria style because they had totally quit that. He was spending way less than half on minerals. And I mean, I showed up and I saw a mineral problem, a toxin problem, and an energy problem. I got there about a month before they were going to start calving. 3 weeks before any mammal gives birth, there's a mineral transfer from mom to junior. That mineral water, I say it's 45, 50% bioavailable. A friend was talking to Bob Kane, and Bob says, oh, I'd argue for 70 to 90%. I don't know. Let's just say it's 50% bioavailable. Well, 2 ounces through the mineral water would do the same thing as 5 ounces dry. I'll get more into that. But this fellow said when his calves were 5 months of age average this year, that fall, I should say, they were at least 125 pounds larger than his calves from the year before. And he didn't change bulls or cows or anything. He just got the toxins out and the minerals in.
Wow.
And so he was in a situation like a lot of people are going to get faced with. And if you only wanted to do one thing, I don't know how long we're going to talk today, but if you only wanted to do one thing, this mineral water deal, any place somebody has got captive water, you can do the every other day mineral water. Or if you really want to cure pink eye in the middle of pink eye season, you need a second stock tank. But if you've got 100 cows, and I'm going to just let people do the math themselves, and a 300-gallon tank, that's 3 gallons of reserve per cow. And you put a half of a 50-pound bag of sea salt in there, your choice. That should last 100 cows about 2 days. And then you take it out, dump it out, see how much you dumped out, and vary how much you put back in. I mean, there's a part of this that you have to do some thinking. That right there, we could stop this recording. That would save a lot of people a lot of money. Cattle get mineralized so fast. There's some amazing stories about how well that's worked.
Can you talk a little bit more about the specifics, size of the stock tank, time in the...
Okay. So if you, let's just say you don't want to do 2 tanks. You've got 1 tank, it's not metal, and it's X size. Pull a number out of the air for me.
350 gallons.
250 gallons. So if you took 20 pounds of sea salt and put it in a tea bag, a woven nylon feed sack, and put it into that tank in the morning, and that evening take it out and dump it out. And I want to talk in a minute about what to do with what you see coming out. Day 2, you don't do anything. We're back to fresh water. Day 3, we put in X amount, and you've adjusted it either up or down depending on what you saw, and leave it till evening. And then day 4, you don't do anything. We're back to fresh water. So about 3/8 of the time, 1/3 of the time, the cattle are getting mineral water, and about 2/3 of the time they're getting fresh water. I absolutely know there's no danger there in almost every situation. If done correctly, there have been a lot of places where people have screwed it up, wrong amount of time, wrong amount of salt, blah, blah, blah. But if done correctly, it just gets cattle mineralized faster than anything I've ever seen. So back to your homework here. You've got this 250-gallon tank. Let's just say you did put a half a bag of sea salt in there. When you got ready to dump it out, if you're throwing away about 10% of the volume, you're perfect. The rest of it all dissolved out into the water. 92 minerals in nature's balance, 3.5% sodium chloride and the other 90 minerals. The vast majority of the sodium chloride is in your tea bag you're dumping out. The cattle did not stop ingesting minerals because they got tired of ingesting sodium chloride. Now you need to leave dry sea salt, probably no enticer, but maybe you will. Hey, if you find yourself in a jackpot, you've got to do some other things. But if you were doing it every other day and they just were getting 2 ounces of sea salt dry plus this, you would probably get along okay. In a dry year like this, you may need to force feed a little bit more sea salt, but it depends. Everybody's zip code's different. And the starting place of everybody's cows is different, Clay. Some people are right on the edge of acid, and they'd be better off if they're the kind that their cattle get pink eye early on in the year. I would highly recommend the second stock tank. If they're the kind that rarely have a problem, that every other day mineral water deal should work pretty well.
Sure. And it's a ratio in pounds to kind of the size of the tank. Is that right?
Yes, but do you have hard water? Do you have soft water? Is your water warm? Is it cold? Is it city water? I mean, there's a lot of variables here. What you need is a place to start. Okay. And you'd be better off to put in more than you think you're going to need. And when you take that tea bag out 12 hours later and half of the sea salt is still there, okay, next time I only need to put 1/3 of a bag of sea salt in instead of a half, and take it out 12 hours later. And there's some thinking that a person has to do, and you've only got to do it for a little bit, but just realize in the winter, well, one thing about it, in the winter, on that day you're making mineral water, you're not going to have as big an ice ring to chop the next morning as you did on the freshwater morning, but you can do that year round. A lot of people, once they figure out how well that every other day deal works, they just do it year round. That's what they do.
Sure. And so kind of that 10% of the volume being left is your benchmark, and whether you've got hot water, cold water, warm water, city water, soft water, hard water, if you can get to that 10%, that all those other things are kind of they're going to have come into play already, and you don't have to do the math on that. Just get to the 10% of the volume left.
Yes. And, let's say you started out and you kind of had it figured out right now. And then we get to 110, darn it. You may find that, hey, we're down to there's 3% left. Well, warm water holds more minerals than cold water. So you're going to have to vary it winter to summer, even on your own ranch, even if the water is always just as hard or always just as soft, or okay.
Yep. And are there some dangers here, or some precautions? I know you mentioned not metal tanks. Are there any other things that we should, like, if it is hot, like I do deal with hot water, because I'm still using over the ground pipeline, and so I do deal with some warm water sometimes. Are there some dangers there of getting too much in, or how do we think about those things?
Well, when it's hot out, it would be better to have cooler water, but the balance, the ratio, right after World War II, American Navy went around the world, multiple samples of every salt body of water, and they found out it's always 92 minerals, and it's always in this balance. There's more minerals in a gallon at the equator than at Sitka, Alaska, warm water, cold water, but they're always in the same balance. A lot more bioavailable. I guess if there was a danger, it would be forgetting that they need fresh water at some point. Huh. They can't drink seawater 24 hours a day,
sure,
7 days a week.
Earlier on in this episode, you mentioned apple cider vinegar. How is that delivered? Where does that come in this discussion?
Well, it's I consider it number 3 for alkaline forming in the body. You're going to get the one thing about the vinegar, the whole apple vinegar, and that's the stuff here from Golden Valley in Idaho. It has more enzymes than the other manufacturers because they start out with apple juice concentrate, and only place to get enzymes is peels and cores added to make the vinegar. Anyway, 20% or more better feed digestion. So if we've got lignified grass for a month longer or 2 of the year, we're going to stretch the grass that we do have 20%. Typically, unless you've got, towards the east side of the U.S., if you were there in Nebraska, if you spent $1 on this whole apple vinegar, you would save $2 on feed. It pays for itself, and it's alkaline forming.
Very good. Thank you for mentioning the Eastern U.S. You reminded me of a question that I had come in. It was submitted by a member of my secret Facebook group. Unfortunately, I didn't get a good recording of the voicemail left, and he said he just wanted to know about garlic. We see a lot of salt with garlic in it for the purpose of fly control. How do you feel about those products?
Garlic works. It's kind of a Band-Aid, okay? So back down to the list, baking soda, conditioner, vinegar, sea salt. Baking soda, it has about 12 minerals in it, but it's a one and done pretty much. You're using it mainly to get the cattle alkaline. The conditioner, it'll get the cattle alkaline. It aids in digestion, and it's very effective at pulling the neighbor's toxins out of your cows, which reduces stress, which they're no longer tying up the minerals that you are feeding. An animal that is acid does not digest nor anywhere near store as many minerals as an animal that is alkaline. When they're alkaline, they can digest more and store more of the minerals. So if you're just if your cattle are acid all the time and you're feeding a steady mineral, a lot of those minerals are just going through the cows. But if you can get them alkaline, if you just did the baking soda, and you would get more out of that mineral program if you could put them in an alkaline state. Anyway, alkaline or baking soda number 1, conditioner number 2 on the alkaline, vinegar 3, and then the sea salt. It's just all those building blocks that the cow needs for everything. And the less feed she has and the poorer quality feed she has, the more minerals she needs every day.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit of ground today. I guess, how about we wrap up with kind of applying this on my ranch scenario. So I have been using just the feed store minerals. This is hypothetical. I've been using just the feed store minerals, and I invite Steve to my house, and we're gonna rip the Band-Aid off and go to this system. What are we doing? Day 1. What are we doing for the first month? What are we doing 6 months and a year from now?
I tell everyone, leave the mineral that you're currently feeding out there, just so you can see in almost every situation how much less they're eating. There are some really good minerals out there, but they're few and far between. The first thing I would tell everybody to do, it costs the least. Now, time is money, but it costs the least, and you get the most effect is the mineral water, whether that's the every other day or you decide to have 2 tanks. Some people can't do that. It's live water, pond water. And while I'm right there on the pond water, the Redmond conditioner, a couple times a year, maybe take a 50-pound bag and walk around that pond and throw that out in there. It'll bind toxins, colloidal minerals, and the water in that pond will actually be a little bit cooler than if you didn't throw that conditioner in there. So then if you can't do the mineral water, I'm going to suggest more than just putting out sea salt. I'm going to suggest enticing 5 to maybe 7 ounces of sea salt on a year like this. And we've got the different enticers, cane sugar, dry molasses, soybean meal, cracked corn. There may be others, things that people could use. It's just that's what I've heard so far. When you get that in there, you can actually get cattle detoxified by feeding 7 ounces of sea salt a day, but it takes more time. If you live danger close, there are soybeans and GMO corn across the road. You want to feed conditioner for about 9.5 months of the year.
Wow.
There's 2.5 months you don't want to feed it. A month before you start calving until about 45 days in, because you could get too large calves. However, then you want to hit it hard again for that last month month and a half before you put the bulls in. If you are going to feed the apple cider vinegar and the cattle get to liking it, and typically they'll overconsume, you can use it as an enticer for the sea salt. I was telling the fly story about a guy in South Dakota. Well, he figured out in the winter to keep the vinegar from freezing, he took a 50-pound bag of sea salt, 4 gallons of vinegar, stirred it up, kind of have cream of wheat looking deal there. Tomorrow you come out, the there's no liquid on top. Another gallon of vinegar, stir it up. Next day, same thing. When the salt is all gone, start over with 50 pounds of sea salt and 4 gallons of vinegar. He said a little ways, month and a half in, he had to start adding 10 pounds of cracked corn to that mix. But he said at the end of about 3 months, his cows were getting 4 or 5 ounces of sea salt a day through the winter and 5 to 6 ounces of vinegar per cow per day through the winter. And he didn't have to buy an enticer because he was going to feed the vinegar anyway.
And so generally is that, I think I don't know if you've answered this question yet, but generally is that apple cider vinegar just delivered liquid in a separate pan, or how is it generally delivered?
People use lick wheels,
okay,
the covered with the lick, and that slows them down. The heavy vinegar, it's got more apple pieces, parts, if you will, in it, and it'll climb up those wheels. It doesn't work so good with just conventional vinegar. And you've got to kind of size it to your operation. You're going to need rim space. And I should have mentioned that at the beginning of all of this. If you're trying to get 7 ounces of sea salt instead of 2 in your cows, you need 3.5 times as much rim space as you needed when you were just had it enough for 2 ounces. So with the cows, long, narrow tray, you pour in 5 gallons of vinegar and another 10 or 15 gallons of water. So it kind of, waters it down, actually. No one cow can get a lot. But at some point, they'll start drinking you out of house and home. And at that point, it's an excellent enticer for the sea salt.
So I think I heard the illustration when I was in the class at Bart Carmichael, Wedge 10 Angus put on a class, and you were the speaker for 2 or 3 days, and you were talking about some of these things during that class, and I think I heard you talk about kind of getting the fire going and then shutting the fire down, and that was with the mix or the ratio of the conditioner and the bicarb and the sea salt. Is that kind of what you were talking about? Right before calving, and through calving, we want to remove the conditioner.
Yes, and so if you think about the conditioner as an optimizer, whatever you've got going on, if you add conditioner, you're going to get more of that. If the cattle are doing good, gaining well, and you add conditioner, they're going to gain even better. Well, at the end of gestation, you want to feed alfalfa hay, you can create a calving problem by overfeeding your cows. Similarly, you can create large calves by feeding the conditioner at that time. So stop the conditioner about a month before calving. and then start in when you're all but done calving and hit it pretty hard up till you put the bulls in. So kind of back to the formula, maybe. I don't know that you asked the question, or maybe you did and I avoided it, but on a normal year, I say 5-3-1. 5 ounces of sea salt, 3 conditioner, 1 ounce of baking soda. If you get into jackpot, you're going to need more. That fly deal, they were at 7 ounces of both conditioner and baking soda. Well, they didn't need that. Once they repelled them, they got alkaline. Then he backed off to about half that much of both of those. And how did he do that? He just put less Enticer in with the mix. Well, on a year like this, you may need 7 ounces of sea salt and 4 conditioner and 2 or 3 baking soda. 2 or 3 baking soda. But our cattle are going to tend to get acid earlier in the year this year than they normally do. So pink eye, foot rot, those sorts of things are going to show up earlier. And the pink eye deal, another story. You can cut it out if you don't want to tell it or don't want to hear it. But a guy came to a school, Gerald Fry and I did about 5 or 6 years ago at the end of the month here, the end of June. He lived in southeastern Ohio, and when he left home, he had 30 active cases of pink eye. 5 of them were blind. He went home. He made the mineral water in a second stock tank. He emailed me in 2 weeks and said, other than one of the blind ones, all the other cases resolved on their own, and the only thing he changed was he put mineral water out there in a second stock tank for his cows and calves.
Very good stuff. Steve, I really appreciate your time today. Are there any other big nuggets that we haven't covered yet that need to be spoken to in this episode?
Well, I just fear that people are going to have to get rid of some cows, and which ones. And of course, well, now you're going to know my political affiliation. The calf is your trump card. The cow that's producing a good calf, she gets to stay. But, there are things that the one that's the more likely to not do you a good job, disappoint you somewhere, is the one that didn't shed its hair coat by the time you put the bulls in. That red solo cup cow, the small end, the part that sits on the table, that's towards the cow's head. Everything gets bigger as you go back. The sex hormones shut off long bone growth, estrogen in the front end. Cow should look like she's walking, a fertile cow should look like she's walking downhill on level ground. She needs a big gut so she can eat and digest a lot of this dry feed and get along on less of that. There are butterfat indicators. I think we talked about all of this in that last episode. But she's getting wider as she goes back, slope from hooks to pin. So I don't get rid of the good ones. And if you feel like, well, I don't know, there are a lot of people out there telling these stories. I think we maybe said it earlier, Dallas Mount in the Ranching for Profit, Ian Michelinis, Johan, Alan Williams, Jim Garish, plan for events like this, how you graze. So kind of spinning my wheels there.
No, it's great. No, I appreciate it. Anytime I can wind Steve Campbell up and let him go, it's good. So I appreciate it. workingcows.net/196 is the show notes page for today. So workingcows.net/196. If you want to go there, there will be a link to Steve's previous episode, which I have received a lot of feedback from. Many people have emailed me and said, I've listened to that episode 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And so it's a very, very helpful episode, selecting the right cow. A lot of the last 3 minutes of this episode, we spent an hour talking about it in the last episode with Steve, and that'll be in the link at the show notes page as well. Steve, you mentioned about 8 books today. Is that kind of how all of these things got discovered? Is there a place where this discussion is synthesized and condensed into a consumable format, or is it just read for your entire life and learn these things?
Excellent question. I don't know any one place you could go to get all of this. The best book I've ever read, if you already know something about a cow, is Factors Affecting Calf Crop. There are about 15 different contributors. If anybody wants a copy of it, they can email me and I'll send a PDF version, or if you want your own copy in your hands, you can find them on the internet for $500, $600, $700, $800. But I'm happy to send. I can send it to you, or you can send them directly to me. One thing I do want to say again, though, what I want to leave people with is, if they're seeing fly pressure, if they're seeing pink eye, their cows are acid. Baking soda, conditioner, vinegar, sea salt. And you're probably going to need more of each of those this year than you have in the past. And if you've got a mineral you like, just nothing from China. Really hold their feet to the fire on nothing from China.
Nothing out of the Wuhan lab. Got it.
Not even that. But it was probably 15 years ago when nothing from China, and my problems just kind of melted away when I made sure there was nothing from China going into the mineral program for the cattle, fertilizer.
Well, Steve, you still doing some schools and stuff? Is tailormadecattle.com still the place to send people to find out where you're going to be next?
Absolutely. I try to update my travel schedule. I do have a loop, if you will, planned here starting after the 4th of July and over into Wyoming and up Montana, North, South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and I'll be gone about 5 weeks. There's a couple of field days in Missouri there, 26th and 28th of July, and then the 6th and 7th of August, there's a couple of field days in western Oklahoma. And then I'm just going to a lot of different places along the way.
Very good. Yeah, I will put a link in the show notes page at workingcows.net/196 to Steve's website. You can get a hold of him there, find out where he's going to be, and find out which of those events are open to the public and something that you could get in on. But in any case, Steve, I wanted to say thanks for your time today, and appreciate you coming on to share it again.
But I kind of want to go back one other place. You mentioned the website, and I did a couple of videos for the Canadians here about a month and a half ago, a part 1 and a part 2, each of them about an hour and a half long. And it took 3 hours to tell this story that you and I talked about today. And it was a Zoom deal, so the slides are there with all of the pictures and words. And so if somebody wants to go deeper, that would be the way to do it.
Very good, Steve. Thank you again for your time today.
Well, Clay, thank you, and God bless you and all your listeners.
Very good stuff there. As always with Steve Campbell, I encourage you to check out the show notes page for today. There will be a link to the videos that he mentioned up there at workingcows.net/196. Also, encourage you to come on back next week. We've got a barn burner of a discussion regarding EPDs with Craig Guffey of Swearingen Angus. So really looking forward to sharing that one with you. We'll see you real soon with another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.